Welcome to Kinda Sound Radio. You're here with me, your host, Juliette Bryant. This is Transformative Health, and I am very excited today to have an author with me who has really been very profound in my journey of awakening and been a deep source of guidance for me through his books. So this is a real honor for me to introduce Neale Donald Walsch. Now, he's written over 40 books on contemporary spirituality and its practical application in everyday life, including his newest book, which is amazing, God Talks: The Experiences of Humanity's Connection with a Higher Power. Now, this book is absolutely phenomenal, and we're going to be talking about this in a minute. Neale is the best-selling author of the Conversations with God series, which 7 of the 9 books made the New York Times bestsellers list. Book 1 remained on this list for a huge 134 weeks. Wow. His books have been translated into 37 languages and have been read by millions of people around the world. And I'm sure if you haven't read his books already, you will be after hearing this conversation with the amazing Neale Donald Walsch. Welcome to the show, Neale.
Thank you, Juliette. It's lovely to be here. How may I be of service?
Well, I would love to talk to you about your latest book, God Talks. I just finished it recently and was blown away by it. It was such a beautiful compilation of stories of how God talks to people. I found it absolutely magical. And one of the things that I found so beautiful was near the beginning, you said that God was pure love. Now, when you said that, that really resonated to me, and I'm sure it has for many, many people. And I'd love you to explain this concept of pure love to the listeners, if you can.
Thank you. May I begin, however, by correcting, because I heard you say the title of the book twice in a way that's not correct. There is no S. You've said God Talks twice, but the title of the book is God Talk. There's no S after the word talk. And I only mention that in case someone looks up, wants to look up the book. They don't look it up with the wrong title. The book is called God Talk, and it's about the way God communicates with human beings. Now, to answer your question that began our interview, yes, it's my understanding that God is most easily defined as what we would call pure love. Now, often when I say that, Juliette, people will say to me, "Oh, Neale. Are we to experience that the big revelation from Neale Donald Walsch is that God is love?" Everyone knows that God is love. Even religions that have differences of opinion on dogma will agree that God is love. And I have to say to them, wait a minute, that's not my statement. I'm not saying that God is love. I'm saying that God is pure love. Now, my friend might say, okay, what's the difference? And the difference, in direct answer, by the way, to your question, Juliette, what is pure love about? The difference is that pure love, which is my definition of God, needs, expects, requires, and demands nothing in return. We can't even love the person on the pillow next to us that way. Much less can we imagine a God who loves us that way. But what we are suggesting is that God is the living definition of pure love. Again, needing, requiring, expecting, and demanding nothing in return. That means we don't have anything that we have to do, nothing we have to say, no way we have to believe, no particular religion we must belong to, no particular set of rules, guidelines, and regulations that we have to follow in order for us to be loved by God. So if we understand that God is pure love, it changes our whole way of relating to the divine and hopefully our way of relating to each other.
I have to say that when I heard that, it made me really think about my relationships with people and coming into that space of it having no need, because everything becomes so need based in our world. And, when I thought about that concept of the pure love, if all religions applied that concept of a God that didn't need or demand or ask for anything, there'd be no wars. It would put an end to all of the suffering and the conflict, which is such a beautiful and powerful statement, especially at this time when there is so much religious conflict in the world. So that to me was such a pivotal thing that you said. So beautiful. I wanted to talk about one of the parts of the book that was so beautiful was the sharing of the different stories of how God communicates to other people. And there's a beautiful story about a woman and how God was communicating through birds. And this really touched me, this story of how God is in this interplay of communication in so many different ways. And when I listened to that, I thought God for me really communicates through nature, through plants, through trees, through animals, through that interaction in my life. Would you say that for you, God's communication is mainly through your books, through the written word, or do you feel God's communication in everything?
Oh, I would not limit it in any way to simply what I received in the books. I think that God is talking to all of us over, 1,000 moments in 100 lifetimes in a million different ways, really. Not just with words that we might hear in our mind, but feelings and, as you say, certain events that occur, whether it's a bird flying by at just the right moment. Or let me give you a perfect example. Um, I was once sharing with a person a very difficult and challenging concept about life as part of my spiritual mentoring program. And when I finished with that person's session, it was rather late at night, and we closed our session and our time together had ended. And I began to wonder, I began to question myself, because I remember saying some very challenging things to this wonderful lady. And I went outside for a little walk. It was maybe at 10 o'clock at night. The sun had gone down. And I looked up at the sky and I saw a beautiful, beautiful, starry sky. But I was remember thinking, gee, I hope I'm not misleading this person. I wish I could know for sure that what I said to her about God's love and God's level of understanding and God's awareness and God's acceptance of all of us. I sure hope that those statements were accurate. And just at that exact moment, Juliette, at that precise moment, a shooting star streaked across the night sky.
Wow.
And it was unbelievable. And I thought, if God could have given me a more definite sign, I'd like to know what it could possibly have been. It was a spectacular moment in my life. And I realized it was just one of, as I said a moment ago, a thousand different ways that God communicates with all of us. God is talking and communicating in 100 ways with all of us all the time. Most people are calling God's communications something else because, Juliette, they don't want to be marginalized or ridiculed, or worse yet, even have people say that, what, have you lost your mind? Do you need psychiatric help? You really think God is talking directly to you? So I've realized that people use different ways of describing what I call conversations with God. People call it, women's intuition. They might call it a psychic hit. They might call it an epiphany or a moment of clarity or a brilliant idea, whatever words they can get away with, that they don't have to actually say what it really is, which is a conversation with God, or at least if you please, a communication from God, a, a, a communication about life to life itself, from life itself. So, yes, I think that there are an endless number of ways that God is communicating with us all the time, not just words in my books.
I think what you said is very interesting, that so many people have um, negative connotations and associations linked to the word God, because God has been put on these, has been used, that word God has been used in so many negative ways, and to create such friction and division in the world. And God also has that very masculine overtone to it, potentially. I liked how in God Talk you say she, um, as opposed to he in it, and there's the balance, because for me anyway, God is neither masculine nor feminine. It encompasses everything, but God has had this very Christian um, belief put on it of the masculine, and
Well, it's not just a Christian, by the way, belief. You said a very Christian way of believing that God is masculine. Actually, it's not limited to Christianity. Most of the Jewish traditions, most of the Muslim traditions, most of the Hindu traditions, most of the religious traditions of every kind in the planet, not just Christianity,
yeah.
declare that God is a man or has a masculine form, and they use the masculine pronoun, he or him, to refer to God all the time. So that's not just limited to Christianity. The largest number of the religions of the world declare that God is a masculine energy and use the pronoun he or him to refer to God.
Yeah. No, that is very true, and I think that's why people sometimes don't want to say God is talking to them, because it's putting these limitations, where for me God isn't limited. God isn't limited to these religions, to the control that we've put on to God. um in your book, so that
Well, let me say
yeah.
this much. I know who the highest power is in my household, and it is feminine. It's called a wife.
And if you think about it, back in time before the kind of patriarchal society, we were a matriarchal society, and everything was based on the Mother Earth, and that creation concept of birth and life coming from the woman. um so I like that you say that the head of your household is your wife.
I guarantee it. And you're right, of course. To talk seriously for a moment, you're perfectly correct. The matriarchy, was in fact the cultural norm on this planet for many, many, many hundreds of years. And then there was kind of in a sense, kind of a rebellion as men decided they didn't just want to be worker bees. They didn't want to just be, um, assigned the task of bringing home the bacon, if you please, and going out and doing the hunting and bringing the animals back and doing all of that particular stuff and serving the feminine community. So men revolted and decided to now the tables have turned, and they changed humanity into a masculine driven society and sublimated the feminine influence. And I think where we're going now, however, Juliette, in the years just ahead, I think we're moving now finally toward a place of balancing between the matriarchy and the patriarchy, where we see that men and women will suddenly begin to hold a place of equality in every area of life, occupations, politics, religion and spirituality, and of course, the idea of who and what God is.
Yeah, I love that. I do feel that that is where we're moving, and that's what I hope for, this balance. And you have to have, it's like the pendulum, don't you? It has to swing from one extreme to another to find where that resting place is in the middle of balance. Because without the extremes, it's hard to know what that central point is.
I agree with you completely. And I hope we can find that central point in my household because I'm sick and tired of my wife being the boss of all things. You know what's really funny? I always say we laugh about that. I'm kidding, of course, but I really do say this. My wife enjoys my sense of humor because whenever she says anything, where do you want to have dinner tonight? You know, how do you want to design the living room? In which way do you think we should, spend our money next month? I always say to my wife, "You're the boss of all things, and we'll do whatever pleases you to do." And she says, "Man, God, am I glad I married you."
Yeah. You've learned how to have a good, easy life.
Yeah, I have no need to control anything.
Beautiful. That's really beautiful. How long have you been married?
Not long enough.
Oh,
16 years.
amazing. That's very beautiful. I've been married to my husband coming up 13 years now, so it's a beautiful journey. And I think through relationships, I feel God talks to us through that other person. There is that reflection of the divine in each other. If we can get past the kind of everyday mundane stuff, when we look into the eyes of our beloved, I think that's where we can see the reflection of God.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the more that we see that reflection of God, the easier it becomes to get past the so-called mundane day-to-day stuff.
Mm, mm. So I want to ask you, this God Talk is your 40th book now. So what inspired you to write it, and how would you say it's different from your previous books?
Well, I wasn't really inspired to write it of my own accord. Actually, my telephone rang. It's most unusual because most authors who write books, they finish writing a book, then they try to find a publisher. That was the case for me. I'm 39 of my previous books. I write a book, then I try to find a publisher. And my literary agency looks to see if there's someone who would like to publish the book. But in fact, in this case, my phone rang for the first time in my life, and a publisher was calling me. And the publisher said, "Would you be interested, Mr. Walsch, in writing a book for us?" And I said, "By golly, I've never had such a call. What did you have in mind?" And the lady, the publisher was a lady, and she said, "We'd like you to write a book about telling people how they could move closer to having their own conversations with God, by explaining how it happened to you and how you could maybe develop a certain step-by-step process that could help people have their own conversation with God. Would you be willing to write such a book?" I said, "You know what? I'd be happy to do that." So I sat down and I began writing. In about 4.5 weeks, I finished writing the book. And I sent it in to them. And of course, I wasn't writing it 24 hours a day, but a couple of hours each day I would devote to the project. And after a month and a half or so, I sent it in to them and they said, "Well, we love it. We're going to publish it." And then they added those stories you're talking about. What the publisher did that made it really a special book, they put an invitation on the internet and they asked people, if you feel that you've ever had a moment of divine intervention in your life, please send us your story. And they received, they told me, hundreds of stories from people all over the world. And they picked out 8 or 10 of them, more or less at random, because they were all special stories. But they picked out 8 or 10 of them at random and put them in the book, specifically to show that conversations with God and divine intervention, that these were not unusual situations or abnormal circumstances, but that this kind of interaction is going on all the time. And here's proof of it. So it's not just about Neale Donald Walsch, some guy in Oregon who claims to have interactions with the divine. here are some other stories. And the stories that they put in the book are really, really wonderful accounts from people all over the world. So that's what makes the book special in my view, because it's not just one man's idea, and nor is it one man's narrative, but it in fact includes commentaries from ordinary, everyday people, not authors, not spiritual teachers of some sort, but just ordinary, everyday people. A woman who was reassured her health condition would be healed, a single mom whose message reaffirmed her belief that God heard her prayers, a scientist whose conversation with the presence of God dramatically changed his life, and even a school teacher who received a divine message to help her connect with her students. So it's just wonderful stories that complete the book, and that's what makes the book unusual and different from anything else that I've ever been involved with.
Do you have a favorite story that was put in there?
No, there's no way. Are you kidding me? You think I'm going to claim that? I'm going to point to one of the seven, one of the 9 stories, and make everybody else upset with me. There's no way I'm going to do that.
No, and that's the thing, isn't it? They're all so magical in different ways, aren't they? I do have to say the bird one was definitely my favorite. I really loved that, and you'll have to read the book God Talk to hear these beautiful, beautiful stories, because they are incredible. And it must have been amazing for the publisher to read all of these accounts coming in of people's interaction with God. That must have been so inspiring.
Yes, they told me that they had actually assigned 2 other staff people. They received so many stories that they assigned 2 staff people to take a week or so to read all the stories to make sure they didn't miss any that came in. So yes, they told us that everybody at the publishing house was inspired by the many, many, many anecdotal manifestations, the testimonies, if you please, of God's intervention in the lives of people everywhere.
In the book God Talk, you share 6 steps that you do to talk with God, and step 3 you define willingness. And what does this really mean to you? And what can people do to really be willing?
Well, the reason I listed step 3 as willingness is because, Juliette, we live in a world, if you please, in a culture, a global culture, that actually is biased against the idea that God would speak directly to us, I mean, individually. So, and not only is our culture, our general culture biased, that is, most people believe it's not possible, but even our religions, there are 4,223 religions being practiced on the earth right now, not since the beginning of time, but being practiced today on the earth. And the largest number of those religions declare that if we say that God is talking directly to and through us, we are committing blasphemy, apostasy. We are a heretic. And in some countries, believe it or not, in some countries, those ecclesiastical offenses are punishable by death. So we have to, the third step of willingness means we have to be willing to have the courage to stand up against the religious and the social bias against the idea that God talks to us, and the idea that people will think that we are, crazy or heretical to say that God is speaking directly to me. No, maybe fair enough. Maybe God talks to the Pope. Okay, we can go there, or to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, I don't know about the British, but maybe maybe God talks to the chief ulama or the head rabbi or whatever. But God doesn't talk to people who don't have any credentials, the average human being, except that she does. He talks to all of us all the time, as I mentioned earlier in our time together here today. So I hope that people can demonstrate a level of willingness and courage, because it takes courage to stand up against, it takes idea heroes to stand up against the thought that such a thing could never happen. And what I call for in all of my books is what I call idea heroes. An idea hero is a person who's willing to say something that they know ahead of time most people will disagree with.
Mm.
Galileo was a perfect example, just to use an example so people understand what I'm talking about. Galileo was an idea hero. He actually said in 1633 that the earth revolved around the sun. In 1633, the church taught that the sun revolved around the earth, that the earth was the center of the universe, that we were God's most special creations. That was the official teaching, the dogma, the doctrine, if you please, of the Roman Catholic Church. And Galileo was excommunicated and condemned to hell by the church for daring to suggest that it was the opposite, that the sun did not revolve around the earth, that the earth revolved around the sun. And he was actually placed into a home that he was, imprisoned in his own, not in a jail to be fair, but he was put under house arrest for the rest of his life. But he refused to rescind his own statement that the earth revolved around the sun, because his scientific discovery proved to him without a doubt that that was true. Well, of course, the church, it did admit ultimately that Galileo was right.
But not until
So
19...
wait, don't, my punchline, I was going to do the punchline.
Oh, sorry.
Let me do the punchline.
Yeah.
The church did ultimately admit that Galileo was right 356 years later.
I mean, that is quite something, isn't it? 360 years later. Wow. And I think what you said, is with the whole thing about God talking to us, there's a huge thing of egotism that I think people are worried about. Because if you say God's spoken to me, there is that fear of people thinking you're big-headed, and that you're being, well, who are you to have God talking to you? Because as you said, religion has created this divide that God only talks through the priests or through the rabbis or through, it's not to the common man or woman, because how could, it takes the control away, doesn't it? When it's, if everyone can speak to God. And so I think this is such a beautiful concept and such an important concept.
Well, religion teaches that everyone can speak to God, to use your exact words of the last sentence. No religion would disagree that everyone can speak to God. The disagreement is that God does not speak directly back to everyone else.
Yeah.
That God only talks to the head ulama or the chief rabbi or the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, maybe not the British. I keep on making that mistake, because if you're British, obviously God does not speak directly to you.
No,
The British don't, I've learned about the Brits. The British people don't care what they do, actually, as long as they pronounce it properly.
I mean, I have to say, I'm seeing a huge awakening of people over here in England, awakening to the divine, to God, to this deeper consciousness. And I was just exploring a lovely place in the Isle of Man recently, and what's incredible is the veil between the worlds, in places like the Isle of Man and Ireland and Scotland and Wales. The ancient cultures, the energy of the earth is still so much more prevalent. And it was until it was when the television arrived in Ireland that they say the fairies stopped communicating with them. So there's been in the Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, there's been so much more of a communication in the olden times with nature and the nature spirits, if you want to call that, or God, that communication with that divine presence.
Speaking of the olden times in Great Britain, Bill was right. Bill had it perfectly correct.
As in
Hundreds of
William
years.
Shakespeare.
Oh,
Which
you
Bill are
think
we
I'm talking
talking?
Bill Clinton?
Oh, okay. What did Bill Clinton say?
No, I was talking about William Shakespeare. You took my punchline away again.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I didn't know if
But
you
it
were talking
was
about Bill Bryson or William
no,
Shakespeare.
of course, I was talking about Shakespeare. But it was Shakespeare who said, in his brilliance, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Yeah.
Then he went on to also say, to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to rise up against a sea of troubles, and by opposing to end them, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil.
That was a beautiful depiction you just did there. Well, very beautifully presented. I think that, Shakespeare had some incredible words of wisdom.
Yes, he was one of the great metaphysicians of all time, truly. And his writing is replete with metaphysical observations, one after the other.
Mm.
To thine own self be true, and it follows as the night the day, thou then canst not be false to any man. That's a brilliant observation.
Yeah.
And his writing is filled with brilliant observations.
I studied classical acting for many years. That was my first foray into life, was classical acting, and I loved Shakespeare. So it's beautiful hearing you reciting it in such an amazing way. When you write about God communicating, why is it so important to you that people hear God talking all the time?
Well, because it can change the planet, it can change the experience of our species, and it might even stop us from self-annihilation.
Mm.
Right now, we're simply behaving, and I should say continuing to behave like 2-year-olds, killing each other over border disputes, permitting and allowing the kind of economic disparity that creates a situation where 8 people can hold more wealth and resources than half the human race combined,
Mm.
allowing ourselves as a species to continue ignoring what we are doing to our own ecology
Mm.
and pretending that it's not happening, that we're making it all up, although it's pretty clear that we're not. So why is it important to talk about these things? And specifically to talk about the nature of who we really are, why we are really here on the planet, and who and what God is? Because failure to talk about these larger issues will simply allow us to continue our process of self-destruction. And we don't have that much time left. We've kind of run out of time. We can't keep on despoiling our environment. We can't keep on killing each other in wars. You know something, Juliette? We've had armed conflict on this planet for all but 5% of recorded history. That's how primitive we are as a species, and continue to be that primitive to this very day.
Mm.
So only our discussions and our willingness to have discussions about our true nature, that is who we really are as spiritual entities,
Mm.
and deep explorations of the true nature of divinity. Only with those kinds of explorations can we resolve these problems and meet the challenges that we've created for ourselves
Mm.
as a species. I could, of course, be wrong about all of that. What do I know? Forget everything I've just said.
I think you're so true though, you know, and what I've noticed, I teach people about nature. Nature's my kind of uh thing. And what's very beautiful is when you see people learning about the plants and the trees that are all around them, and you see people connecting with the earth and coming into the present moment by looking, by foraging and starting to grow their own foods, you see people really changing because they have a deeper level of respect for the earth, because they realize their place in the earth. And I think that's what we've forgotten, is our place as part of this beautiful creation of God's. You know, this earth is such a majestic place, and so often I think the human race thinks that we're just walking on it, we're separate from it. And that's where this division has come with our humanity, and remembering the essence of who we are. How would you say, Neale, that your communication with God has changed your life?
Well, first of all, it's caused me to experience that I'm not separate from other people, that there really is no separation between me and other human beings, that we are all one. It has caused me to feel also not separate from any life form, just as you mentioned about nature. You know, I've turned into, since my conversations with God, what we call in California a tree hugger. But I actually do go out in the backyard, and I've been known to go out in my backyard and hug the great big apple tree in my backyard, and to say to the tree, "Thank you for your plethora of fruits for all these years, and the beauty and the shade you bring us, the wonder and the glory of who you are in the life form that you have brought forth and manifested as." And so it's changed my whole idea, Juliette, of who I am in relation to everything and everyone around me, not the least of which is God itself. That it has caused me to see that God and I are one, that there's no separation between us. Now, you know, I got to be careful when I say that, because I have to explain exactly what I mean. Because when I say that in a lecture, and I've experienced this at lectures, somebody in the back of the room will inevitably stand up with arms folded in front of their chest and say, "Oh, Neale, what are you trying to say, that you're God? Come on." And I have to explain, wait a minute, that's not exactly what I meant. And I think you know that's not what I meant.
Mm.
When I said that God and we are one, I'm saying that we are to God as a wave is to the ocean.
Mm.
If you've been on an ocean liner and ever stood on the deck and watched the waves arising from the ocean, you realize several interesting things. Number one, the wave is not something other than the ocean.
Mm.
It's simply an individual arising of the ocean in specific and glorious form,
Mm.
with a power and a beauty all of its own. And when that arising is complete, the wave recedes back into the ocean whence it came. That is precisely the nature of our relationship with the divine.
Mm.
Of course, we are not the totality of God, but we are an individuation of divinity. So, folks, I say to my lecture audiences, go out there and make waves.
That's brilliant. Go out there and make waves. And that is such a beautiful analogy, seeing us as part of this huge, immense ocean of God, but not, as you said, the totality of it. And again, for me, I think of it in nature. I think, we're like the beautiful flowers, or the elderberries, or the exquisite roses, or the birds. We're part of this incredible creation that is life, that we are so blessed to be in. It's quite a magical, as you said. It's very, for me, it's very moving and humbling. And I think what you said about gratitude is so apt. Your gratitude for the apple tree. I think when we can have that space of gratitude, it can really change our whole being.
I couldn't agree more with everything you've just said.
So I'd love to know where you see this book moving to, how you see the ripple, the waves that this book will create in the world.
Well, I hope that it could encourage more people to move closer to God, to actually engage in an ongoing conversation with the divine. And I am hoping that it will cause people to realize, as I've just said a moment ago, and to functionalize their own oneness with all of life. So that's my hope, and that's my desire, and that's my prayer. And I think I can see it beginning to happen, not just because of this particular book, but because of what's going on in the world at large, through many ways and means, not the least of which is our, frankly, podcasts like the very one we're doing right here, like the work that you yourself are doing in the world, Juliette. Because if we have, a number of people like you, and, if we can have tons and tons of Romeos and Juliettes, then we can bring true love to the world and a true awareness of who we really are. And, a person might even step away from hearing this very broadcast and say, I think that part of that was the divine just opening me to a larger sense of who I am and a larger reality of my relationship with all the rest of it. And I see that happening around the world because of, the technologies that exist today, Juliette, that didn't exist even 12 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I couldn't have imagined even 12 or 15 years ago being on a program such as this with people all over the world. So we now have technologies that have made the world very, very small and have made it possible for us to now share and spread important messages around the world almost instantaneously, to the point where soon we will reach critical mass. And once we reach critical mass, the first domino will fall and the rest of the dominoes will follow. And critical mass, by the way, most people don't realize is, some people think, well, critical mass is like one more than half of the number, 51%. Critical mass is not 51%. It's not even 31%. It's not even 21%. It's not even 12%. It's not even 10%. Physicists tell us now that critical mass, the number that we need to reach in order to topple the first domino and watch the rest of the dominoes fall, critical mass is defined as anywhere between 2.5 and 5% of the whole number.
Wow.
And with today's technology, we now have the ability to create that kind of critical mass. We're doing it every day on social media, TikTok and Facebook and other social medias that didn't even exist 15 or 20 years ago. And some didn't exist even 5 or 8 years ago. So we find that it's possible to create critical mass around certain thoughts and ideas. The question is not whether it's possible to create critical mass. The question is which thoughts and ideas will we create critical mass around? And
Mm.
that's where you come in. The Juliettes of the world.
Beautiful. It's very interesting because I've been listening to God talk. We've been listening to it on Audible with my son. One of my children is 12, and he has his own radio show. He's part of a youth program on Kind of Sound Radio, where we're really encouraging the youth to have a platform to speak up and to have their voice, because the more youth, the younger we can get people opening up to, the whole concept of Kind of Sound Radio is kindness, so we can spread this kindness and love out. Then we're going to hit this critical mass soon enough. And we were talking about your book, and it was very beautiful listening to him get excited about how God is talking to him, and what this means and what it looks like for him as a 12-year-old boy. And it was amazing just hearing all those connections. So your work is spreading not just to people like me, but to the youth. And I think that's really where, if we can make those changes, we're going to have such a big um, ball of movement, huge waves of movement coming in.
I hope that becomes reality. And I join you in your prediction. Thank you for sharing that story about your wonderful son. And such a thing wouldn't have been even possible 15 years ago. Imagine a 12-year-old having his own radio show. It just simply would not have happened.
Mm.
So that's a case in point, as we say in America. Case in point. That's a wonderful illustration of exactly what we're talking about. And that's why I think we're closer and closer now than we ever have been before. Think of the number of people, for instance, as an example.
Mm.
I want to make a point. I'm not bragging. Trust me, I'm not boasting or bragging. But Conversations with God alone has sold over 15 million copies in 37 languages.
It's incredible.
Now we start adding up all the other messengers and authors who have written, produced radio programs,
Mm.
produced television shows, and found other ways to send messages into the world. We're talking now about ways that we are touching millions and millions and many millions of people
Mm.
around the world. The Conversations with God books alone have been translated into 37 languages.
Yeah.
37 different languages.
Incredible.
So again, I'm not bragging about that because, think of Deepak Chopra, think of, Marianne Williamson, think of other authors, even, some of them even British, believe it or not, and whose work has touched the world, and not just historically like Shakespeare, but contemporarily, people living today, sending messages today about the new spirituality, new ideas about God, about life, and about who we are. I want to just share with you my thought about that. The question that most people have never really asked themselves until most recent times is, who am I really? I mean, really, what is my true identity? Am I a body? Am I a physical lump of clay that moves around, and is chemically driven? Is that who I am? Or am I my mind?
Mm.
The collection of all the thoughts I've ever had and everything I've ever learned and all that I can remember from moment to moment? Or am I a combination of my body and my mind moving through the physical realm on this planet? Is this who I am? Or is it possible, just possible, that I'm more than that? Is it possible that I'm actually a spiritual being, an entity that some religions call a soul? And if it's possible that I am a soul, what am I doing here? Why would a soul place itself in the realm of the physical and put itself through what we all go through in our day-to-day lives. What's the point of this? Is there something going on that I don't really realize? And that's why I always quote the wonderful line from Hamlet. To say it one more time, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And there are. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more going on here than meets the eye. We are spiritual entities having come to the realm of the physical in order to place ourselves in a contextual field in which we find it possible to experience and express, not simply to know, but to experience and express who we really are. It's one thing to know, just to use an example, that let's say that Juliette is generous. Let's just pretend that Juliette is a generous person. Okay, so she knows that she's generous. But there's a part of Juliette that wants to experience that she's generous. She wants to not just know of her generosity, but she wants to express it, to demonstrate it, because the feeling of demonstrating your true nature or any aspect of your true nature is that for which the soul yearns. The soul yearns to demonstrate and to experience its true self as an individuation of divinity, whether it's generosity, compassion, understanding, clarity, awareness, kindness, or simply pure love. So the question that very few people ask themselves needs, I think, to be asked everywhere around the world. Who am I really? And once I discover who I am, is this who I choose to be? A spiritual entity simply traveling through life with a body and a mind as pieces of equipment, but really come here for a reason altogether different than I have been told and taught that my life was about. What if it's true that my life is not about my career, my livelihood, my income, my possessions, the number of people that love me, the number of things that I have in my house, how many pair of shoes I have in my closet? What if it has nothing to do with any of that? What if, in fact, life is not about any of this? What if life is about who we are and how we demonstrate our true identity as individual expressions of the divine? If that's what life is about, would it change the way we move through our day-to-day? And would it change the way we experience our lives, the way we experience our day-to-day? Spiritual masters have all told us that the answer to that question is yes. So the only question remaining is, when will we decide that we are more than a body and more than a mind? And when will we decide to be who we truly are? He was right. There is really only one question: to be or not to be. That is the question.
Yeah, I mean, so beautiful what you've just said, so deeply moving and just spectacular wisdom. And I think the words "know thyself" uh, are the other things that resonate so profoundly with that. When we know ourselves, that true nature of ourselves as part of the divine. And I think that's our mission, isn't it? To return to that knowing, to that remembering of who we are. I want to say such a huge thank you and such gratitude to you for sharing your wisdom with all of the listeners on Kinder Sound Radio and with me. It's been a real honor, and I'm welling up because it has been a real honor to have you on my show. I have listened, I've read your books. They've been a pillar in my spiritual growth for over 20 years. And you've had a really profound effect on me. And so it really is an honor to have had you on the show. We're
Thank
going
you,
to
Juliette. Those are very kind words to say to me, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you and your audience some of the messages that have been given to me. Not my wisdom. I'll deny that it was my wisdom, but have I found a way to share the wisdom that has been shared with me in conversations with God? Yes, I have, and so thank you for the opportunity to do so.
and I highly recommend everyone goes and reads God Talk or listens to it. I loved listening to it. It was a beautiful experience listening to that. And we're going to finish the show with the Perpetual Choirs, my husband's new album. And I thought this was a very appropriate song to finish on. It's called We Are One. And it's communicating this message of oneness, of unity between all of us and God. So thank you again to Neale Donald Walsch for being on my show. Greatly appreciated. Thank you, listeners. You've been with me, Juliette Bryant, here on Kind of Sound Radio, and this is the Perpetual Choirs, We Are One.